You're nothing but a charity case, an unwanted baby my mother took in because she felt guilty. Those words hit me harder than watching my parents' caskets lower into the ground. My sister Cassandra waited until everyone was walking to their cars after the service to destroy everything I thought I knew about myself. I'm Alana Whitehead. I'm 29 years old, and I live in the small town of Millbrook, Connecticut, where everyone knows everyone and secrets have a way of becoming headlines at the local coffee shop. 3 days ago, my parents, Robert and Linda, died when a drunk driver ran a red light during a thunderstorm. They were coming home from their 40th anniversary dinner, probably holding hands like they always did at stoplights. One moment they were here, the next they were gone, and now I was learning that maybe they were never really mine to lose. Before I continue, please hit that like button and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Thank you! The funeral reception was being held in our church's community hall, the same place where I'd had my first communion, where my Girl Scout troop used to meet, where I thought I belonged. I was standing by the coffee station stirring sugar into that terrible church coffee that somehow tastes like disappointment and furniture polish when Cassandra approached with the determination of someone about to drop a bomb. She was 35, 6 years older than me, and she'd always wielded those years like a weapon. Today, she looked around the room, making sure Aunt Dorothy was across the hall with the other relatives, then started her attack. She told me Mom and Dad had hidden the truth my whole life, that I wasn't their biological child, that I was the product of Mom's mistake before she even met Dad. According to Cassandra, they'd only kept me because the adoption agency had already placed me, and Mom was too embarrassed to admit she'd changed her mind. The room seemed to tilt. Several relatives were close enough to hear, and I saw Cousin Brooke already typing on her phone, probably spreading the news through our family group chat like wildfire. Cassandra's face was strange, her recent Botox treatment preventing any real expression while she delivered each revelation like a prosecutor presenting evidence. She couldn't even fake tears properly, her forehead frozen in what looked like perpetual surprise while she destroyed my world. She explained how it all made sense if I just thought about it. She'd gotten ballet lessons at the expensive studio downtown, while I did gymnastics at the YMCA. She'd gone to private school while I went to public. She'd gotten a car for her 16th birthday while I got Dad's old Honda when I turned 18, and only because he'd bought himself a new truck. She'd studied abroad in Paris while I spent my semester working at the hardware store to help with my community college tuition. The evidence had been there all along, she said. I'd just been too naive to see it. Aunt Dorothy had noticed something was happening and started pushing through the crowd toward us, but Cassandra wasn't finished. She pulled out a folder she'd been carrying in her designer purse, though I noticed the logo spelled Channel instead of Chanel, and waved it like a victory flag. She announced loudly enough for everyone to hear that Mom and Dad's estate was worth $3.2 million between the house, Dad's hardware business, and their investments. Then she delivered what she clearly thought was the killing blow. As their only biological child, she was inheriting everything, and I was getting nothing. Absolutely nothing. Because blood mattered and I didn't have theirs. The hall erupted in whispers. Aunt Dorothy reached us and immediately started arguing with Cassandra about decency and timing, while Cousin Brooke backed Cassandra up, saying everyone had suspected I was different anyway. Different, like I was some kind of imposter who'd been caught. Cassandra then informed me I had 30 days to move out of the family home where I'd been living for the past 2 years, while saving money and helping Mom with her arthritis and Dad with the business. She said she was being generous, that legally she could have me out tomorrow. That night, I sat in what I'd thought was my childhood bedroom, staring at photos that suddenly felt like lies. There was one on my 5th birthday where Cassandra stood perfectly centered in her pristine pink dress, while I was off to the side with chocolate cake on my face, wearing something that looked obviously secondhand. Had Mom and Dad just been going through the motions? Had every birthday wish, every goodnight kiss, every proud smile at my graduation been an act? My best friend Megan texted immediately, having heard through the town's impressive gossip network. She said I should fight back, hire a lawyer, not let Cassandra steal my life. But my boyfriend, Jake, called with different advice, suggesting maybe it was better to walk away, that fighting over money would make me just as ugly as Cassandra was being. I wanted to scream at him that this wasn't about money, but about identity, about belonging, about discovering that maybe I'd never had a real family at all. The next morning, I heard Cassandra downstairs talking to a locksmith about changing the locks. She wanted the fancy electronic ones, but had brought the wrong key to copy, an old padlock key instead of the house key, and the locksmith had to explain 3 times that he couldn't make a house key from a gym locker key. It would have been funny if it weren't so cruel. Later, she left me a formal eviction notice delivered by her husband Derek, who couldn't meet my eyes and mumbled an apology before practically running back to his car. The next few days passed in a blur of revelations and humiliations. I found myself examining every memory through this new lens, seeing signs everywhere I'd been, too trusting to notice before. That time, Dad had said, family isn't about blood, it's about showing up. I'd thought he was just being philosophical. Mom's insistence that I was special, that I was chosen for great things, now sounded like guilt speaking. Even the way they'd sometimes look at me with this soft sadness made sense now that I knew they were seeing someone else's child. Cassandra wasted no time establishing her new reign. She'd already been to the bank trying to access Mom and Dad's accounts, though she'd been turned away pending proper documentation. She'd called Dad's business manager at the hardware store, informing him that there would be changes coming soon. She'd even started telling people around town that I'd been cut out of the will because my parents had discovered I'd been stealing from them, a complete fabrication that spread through Millbrook like poison. Mrs. Brennan, who'd been Mom's best friend for 20 years, actually crossed the street to avoid me at the grocery store. The pharmacist, who'd known me since I was in elementary school, suddenly needed to check inventory when I came in. Even at the coffee shop where I'd worked summers during high school, conversation stopped when I walked in, replaced by uncomfortable silence and avoided eye contact. Cassandra had been thorough in her character assassination, telling anyone who'd listen that I had a drug problem, that I'd been taking Mom's pain medication, that my parents had been planning an intervention before they died. The medication lie was particularly cruel because Mom had suffered from severe arthritis the last 5 years, and I'd been the one helping her manage her prescriptions, making sure she took them on schedule, driving her to doctor's appointments when the pain was too bad for her to drive herself. But Cassandra had twisted that into me having access to steal, and in a small town, the most dramatic story usually wins. I discovered more evidence of my apparent otherness in the attic. There was a box labeled Family Photos 1990 to 1994, and it was full of pictures of Mom, Dad, and baby Cassandra. They looked so complete, so perfect. A little family of 3 that clearly didn't need anyone else. Then there was a gap, almost 2 years with no photos, and suddenly I appeared as a toddler, wearing clothes that didn't match the careful way Mom dressed Cassandra, holding a teddy bear that looked older than I was. Megan came over that evening and found me surrounded by photo albums, crying over a picture of my first day of school, where I stood apart from the family, like someone had placed me in the photo after it was taken. She argued that I was letting Cassandra get in my head, that my parents had loved me regardless of biology. But then she pointed out something odd. In all the baby pictures of Cassandra, Mom looked exhausted but happy, the typical new mother. But in my earliest photos, Mom looked sad, grieving almost, even when she was smiling. Jake's response was less supportive. He suggested that maybe this explained why I'd always been so independent, why I'd never asked for help even when I needed it. He said it like it was a defect, like being adopted meant I was broken somehow. When I told him to leave, he actually said Cassandra had warned him I might become unstable when I learned the truth. They'd been talking about me behind my back, and he'd believed her over me. The revelation about Cassandra spreading lies became clearer when Derek called from his car one evening, whispering like he was afraid of being caught. He admitted Cassandra had been planning this for months, ever since Mom and Dad had updated their will 6 months ago. She'd hired a lawyer friend to look into inheritance law, specifically about adopted children versus biological ones. She'd been building her case that I was an interloper, someone who'd taken resources meant for the real daughter. He also revealed something that made my blood run cold. Cassandra had been stealing from our parents for years, taking money from their accounts, using their credit cards, even selling some of Mom's jewelry and replacing it with fakes. She'd taken almost $400,000 over 5 years, but she'd been careful about it. Small amounts that looked like normal expenses. Cash withdrawals that could have been for anything. Our parents had noticed eventually, Derek said, about a year ago, but they'd never confronted her directly because Cassandra had threatened to tell me about the adoption in the cruelest way possible, if they did. The thought that my parents had endured theft and betrayal to protect me from exactly what was happening now made me feel sick. They'd chosen my emotional well-being over their financial security, and Cassandra had used their love for me as a weapon against them. 3 days into my eviction notice, my phone rang at 7 in the morning with a call that changed everything. The man identified himself as Mr. Thornfield from Thornfield and Associates, my parents' attorney for the past 35 years. His voice was careful, measured, like someone who'd learned to speak in ways that couldn't be misinterpreted. He informed me that Cassandra had indeed shown him a will, but there were other documents she didn't know about, documents my parents had specifically instructed him to keep confidential until after their deaths. He suggested we meet, but not at his office, as Cassandra had been calling hourly with threats and had someone watching his building. Instead, he proposed the coffee shop on Maple Street at 2 o'clock. Before the meeting, I remembered something Derek had said about checking Mom's jewelry box. I found it in her closet. The painted blue flowers faded from years of handling. The bottom felt too thick, and when I pressed around the edges, a hidden compartment opened. Inside was a safe deposit key and a note in Mom's handwriting that simply said, "For Alana, the truth matters." There was also an old padlock key that looked similar to the one Cassandra had confused for a house key at the locksmith, and I realized she must have found one just like it somewhere, and assumed it was important. Cassandra's campaign against me had intensified. She'd convinced Cousin Brooke and 2 others to sign statements claiming they'd witnessed me asking my parents for money repeatedly, that I'd been pressuring them to change their will. Brooke owed Cassandra $5,000 from a failed business venture, so her loyalty was clearly purchased. The other cousins had their own reasons involving promises Cassandra had made about the estate. The worst part was when she accidentally sent a text meant for Brooke to the entire family WhatsApp group. It read, "Remember, if anyone asks, Alana has been unstable for years. I've already told the lawyers she's been stealing. Once the house sells, you'll get your money plus extra for helping. Mom always said Alana was a mistake we had to live with, and now we can finally fix that mistake." The family explosion was immediate. Aunt Dorothy posted screenshots to Facebook with a scathing commentary about greed and disgrace. Uncle Pete called Cassandra directly and told her she was no longer welcome at family gatherings. Several cousins left the group chat in protest. Cassandra tried to claim her phone had been hacked, but the damage was done. Her own greed had exposed her. At the coffee shop, Mr. Thornfield was waiting in a corner booth with a thick folder. He looked like every old-fashioned lawyer from every movie, complete with wire-rimmed glasses and a suit that had probably been in style when he bought it in 1995. But his eyes were sharp, and when he started talking, I realized my parents had chosen their protector well. He began with a story from 35 years ago. My father's younger sister, Rebecca, had been 17 and pregnant. The father had vanished the moment she told him, and Rebecca herself was sick with a heart condition that made the pregnancy dangerous. My parents, newly married and trying for their own child, had taken Rebecca in. She lived with them throughout the pregnancy, and they'd promised to raise her baby as their own if anything happened to her. Rebecca died within hours of giving birth to me. She'd lived just long enough to name me Alana after our grandmother, and to make my parents promise I'd always know I was loved. The adoption had been legal and formal, making me their daughter in every way that mattered. But here was the twist that changed everything. Cassandra wasn't their biological child either. She'd been adopted at age 2 from Dad's cousin who couldn't care for her. She'd known this truth since she turned 18, and she'd used it as leverage against our parents ever since. Mr. Thornfield pulled out a document that made my hands shake. 20 years ago, when I was 9 and Cassandra had started her blackmail, my parents had created a trust. They'd placed almost everything in it, the house, the business, the investments, everything except about $50,000 in checking accounts. The will Cassandra had been waving around only covered what wasn't in the trust, and the trust had one beneficiary, me. If you're still listening to my story, I want to thank you again for being here with me through this. Please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button. It genuinely helps more than you know, and your support during this difficult time means everything. Mr. Thornfield explained that my parents had documented everything over the years. Every forged check Cassandra had written, every credit card she'd opened in their names, every piece of Mom's jewelry she'd stolen and replaced with fakes. They'd kept receipts, bank statements, photos of the fake jewelry next to appraisals of the real pieces. They'd built an airtight case but never used it because they still loved Cassandra despite everything, still hoped she might change. The $400,000 she'd stolen had come in waves. First, it was small amounts, a few hundred here and there that they attributed to their own forgetfulness. Then it escalated to thousands at a time, always with some excuse when questioned. Cassandra would claim she'd paid for things they'd asked for, house repairs that never happened, medical bills that didn't exist. By the time they realized the full scope, she was taking tens of thousands, and when they tried to confront her, she threatened to destroy me with the truth about my adoption. Derek had seen some of this documentation 2 weeks ago when Cassandra dragged him to Thornfield's office, trying to intimidate the lawyer into giving her everything immediately. While Cassandra was screaming about her rights, Derek had noticed papers on Thornfield's desk about the trust. He'd taken a photo when she wasn't looking, which is why he'd tried to warn me, though he was too scared of his wife to be more direct. Thornfield scheduled an official will reading at the courthouse for the following week. He warned me that Cassandra would likely escalate when she learned about the trust, but my parents had been specific in their instructions. They wanted the truth revealed publicly in front of witnesses, so there could be no question about their intentions or their love for me. The safe deposit box I opened that afternoon contained everything Thornfield had described, and more. There were letters from Rebecca, including one to her future child to me, saying she was sorry she couldn't be there, but she was leaving me with the best parents in the world. There were photos of Rebecca that showed we had the same eyes, the same stubborn chin, the same wild hair that never quite behaved. There was also a DNA test my parents had done when I was 5, confirming I was Robert's biological niece. But the most heartbreaking discovery was a journal Mom had kept. Entry after entry detailed Cassandra's escalating behavior, the pain of being stolen from by one daughter while trying to protect another, the impossible position Cassandra had put them in. One entry from last year read, "We failed Cassandra by giving her things instead of boundaries, but we will not fail Alana by letting Cassandra destroy her sense of self. The trust will protect her when we're gone." Cassandra, meanwhile, had already started spending money she didn't have. Derek called to warn me she'd bought a Range Rover on credit, joined the most expensive country club in the area, and hired contractors for a $200,000 renovation of my parents' house. She was so confident in her inheritance that she'd told everyone she was expecting over $3 million within the month. The town was starting to turn against her. Her behavior at the funeral, where she'd worn what looked like a rejected outfit from a reality TV show, all leather and lace at our parents' memorial, had already raised eyebrows. The locksmith had told everyone about her confusion with the keys. The bank manager had shared how she'd screamed about discrimination when they wouldn't give her immediate access to the accounts. Even her fake designer bags had become a running joke, especially after the handle of her Gucci bag had broken during the funeral reception, spilling its contents across the church floor. 3 days before the will reading, Cassandra decided to host what she called a memorial gathering at our parents' house. She sent out formal invitations on expensive cardstock, but the real purpose was obvious. She wanted to stake her claim publicly to show everyone she was in charge now. I wasn't invited, but Aunt Dorothy insisted on bringing me anyway. When we arrived, Cassandra had already removed Mom's beloved garden decorations and replaced the handmade welcome mat with something generic from a store. Inside, she'd laid out Mom's possessions like a garage sale, with little tags showing who would get what. Everyone was getting something except me, of course. She stood at the head of the dining room table, wearing white to our parents' memorial gathering, and started distributing items like she was dealing cards at a casino. When she put Mom's wedding ring on her own finger, I couldn't stay silent. I reminded her that Mom had promised that ring to me, had told me on her last birthday that it would be mine someday. The room went quiet. Cassandra laughed and said the gathering was for family only, real family. That's when Aunt Dorothy stood up and said I was more family than Cassandra was acting like. Several relatives nodded in agreement, and Cassandra's careful performance started to crack. That's when Mr. Thornfield walked into the memorial gathering, carrying his briefcase and wearing his best suit. He looked like a man on a mission, and his timing couldn't have been more perfect. The entire family was there to witness what happened next. He addressed Cassandra formally, using her married name, and informed her that the official reading of our parents' complete estate documentation would take place in 3 days at the county courthouse. He emphasized the word complete in a way that made Cassandra's face go pale beneath her spray tan. When she insisted she had the will and didn't need any formal reading, Thornfield smiled the way a chess player does before checkmate. He explained that while she did indeed have a will, it wasn't the only legal document pertaining to the estate. He'd been instructed by our parents to present all documentation publicly, in court, with witnesses present. Any attempt to dispose of estate assets before then would be considered theft. His eyes moved to Mom's wedding ring, which Cassandra was still wearing. She tried to pull the ring off, but her fingers had swollen from stress and too much wine at lunch. The entire family watched as she struggled, yanking and twisting, finally having to excuse herself to the kitchen for soap. We could hear her cursing and running water, and Uncle Pete muttered something about trash, always revealing itself eventually. When she returned, her finger was red and raw, and the ring was finally off. Aunt Dorothy had been secretly recording everything on her phone, pretending to take pictures of Mom's china. She'd captured Cassandra's speech about real family and biological rights, her claim that I was never wanted, and her attempt to sell off family heirlooms before the estate was even settled. The video was already being shared in the family group chat that Cassandra had been removed from after her accidental text revelation. The best moment came when Cassandra's latest fake designer bag, a poor imitation of Gucci with the logo spelled wrong, finally gave up entirely. The bottom seam split open, spilling everything onto Mom's dining room floor. Out fell 3 of Mom's credit cards she'd stolen, past due notices for thousands in debt, printed emails where she was trying to sell Dad's classic car before the estate settled, and most damning, a handwritten list titled After Inheritance that included paying off $60,000 in credit card debt and buying a vacation home in Florida. Derek picked up one of the credit card statements, his face going white as he read it. He asked her how they could possibly owe $40,000 to various stores when he thought they'd been saving for a house. Cassandra hissed at him that it would all be paid off once she got her inheritance, that he needed to think bigger, that they were about to be millionaires. But Derek had finally reached his limit. In front of everyone, he announced he'd seen the trust documents when Cassandra had dragged him to threaten Mr. Thornfield 2 weeks ago. He knew she wasn't getting $3 million. He knew about the thefts from our parents. He was done pretending this was normal or acceptable. The man who'd been too scared to stand up to her for 12 years finally found his spine, and it was in front of 40 witnesses. Cassandra tried to salvage the situation by claiming everyone was conspiring against her, that I'd turned the family against the real daughter. But Cousin Tyler, one of the ones she'd bribed to lie about me, suddenly spoke up. He admitted she'd promised him Dad's car if he said I'd borrowed money and never paid it back. Brooke, still owing her $5,000, stayed quiet, but her shame was obvious. As the family gathered their coats to leave, Cassandra made one last desperate play. She announced that anyone who sided with me would be cut off from the inheritance, that she had the power to ruin anyone who crossed her. That's when quiet Uncle Pete, who never said much at family gatherings, stood up and told her she was exactly the kind of person our parents had tried to protect me from. He said they'd be ashamed of what she'd become, and that was worse than any inheritance could fix. The courthouse, on the day of the will reading, was packed beyond capacity. Half of Millbrook had shown up, drawn by the promise of drama that had been building for 2 weeks. The court officer had to turn people away, and someone had even set up a coffee cart outside like it was some kind of festival. Cassandra arrived with 3 lawyers she couldn't afford, men in expensive suits who looked increasingly uncomfortable as they realized their client had lied to them about the basic facts of the case. She was dressed entirely in black this time, trying to look serious and bereaved, but she'd gone too heavy on the self-tanner the night before and looked more orange than mournful. I sat in the front row with Mr. Thornfield on one side and Aunt Dorothy on the other. Behind us, Derek sat alone, having arrived separately from his wife. The rest of the family filled the rows, and even some of Mom's church friends had come, perhaps feeling guilty about how quickly they'd believed Cassandra's lies about me. Judge Patricia Hoffman presided over the reading. She'd known my parents for decades, had bought her first house with Dad's help at the hardware store, and had zero patience for dramatics in her courtroom. When one of Cassandra's lawyers tried to object before Thornfield even started speaking, she shut him down with a look that could freeze fire. Thornfield began by reading the will Cassandra had been waving around for 2 weeks. It was real, properly executed 5 years ago, and it did leave $50,000 to Cassandra, along with some small, charitable donations. Cassandra smirked, thinking this validated everything she'd been saying, but Thornfield wasn't done. He pulled out a thick document and explained that 20 years ago, our parents had established the Robert and Linda Whitehead Family Trust. This trust contained the family home, the hardware business, all investment accounts, and approximately $3.1 million in total assets. The will only governed assets not already in the trust, which amounted to the $50,000 and some personal effects. Cassandra's lawyers immediately started objecting, saying they hadn't been informed of any trust. Thornfield pointed out that it was public record, filed with the court 20 years ago, and any competent attorney would have discovered it with even basic due diligence. The lawyers looked at Cassandra with a mixture of anger and embarrassment, realizing she'd led them into a humiliating situation. When Thornfield announced that I was the sole beneficiary of the trust, Cassandra shot to her feet and screamed that it was impossible, that I wasn't even their real daughter, that I was adopted and had no right to anything. Her voice cracked with rage, and spittle flew from her mouth as she ranted about blood rights and biological superiority. That's when Thornfield delivered the killing blow. He confirmed that yes, I was adopted, legally and formally, after my biological mother, Rebecca Whitehead, died giving birth to me. Rebecca was Robert's younger sister, making me his biological niece, a blood relative. But Cassandra? She was also adopted, taken in at age 2 when her biological mother, Robert's cousin Maria, couldn't care for her. The difference was that Cassandra had known about her adoption for 17 years, since our parents told her when she turned 18. The courtroom erupted. Cassandra stood frozen, her mouth open, unable to speak. Her entire narrative, her claim to biological superiority, her real daughter status, everything she'd based her cruelty on, crumbled in seconds. She'd tortured me with the truth about my adoption while hiding her own. Thornfield then started the video our parents had recorded. Mom appeared on the screen, looking directly at the camera, and even though I'd watched it once already in the safety deposit box, seeing her again made me cry. She spoke about how they'd loved both of us, how they'd tried to give Cassandra everything she demanded, hoping to fill whatever hole was in her heart, but how the thefts had started 5 years ago and escalated beyond forgiveness. Dad's part was harder to watch. He detailed finding forged checks, discovering credit cards in his name he'd never applied for, realizing Cassandra had sold Mom's mother's jewelry and replaced it with fakes. He showed receipts, bank statements, photos comparing real jewelry to the replacements, $400,000 over 5 years, taken by the daughter they'd raised, while they protected the daughter they'd chosen from the truth being weaponized against her. The video continued with Mom explaining the most painful part. She said Cassandra had discovered the truth about my adoption through snooping in their papers when I was 9. She'd immediately used it as blackmail, threatening to tell me in the cruelest way possible unless they paid for her private college, bought her cars, funded her lifestyle. Every inequality in our childhoods that I'd wondered about had been extortion. They'd created the trust that same year, when I was 9 and Cassandra was 15, specifically to protect my inheritance from her greed. They'd known even then that she would try to take everything if given the chance. The lawyer who'd helped them set it up had warned them to tell me the truth, but they'd wanted to preserve my innocence, to let me have a childhood free from the knowledge that my sister saw me as an interloper. But the most shocking revelation was about the theft. Dad explained that they'd actually noticed the stealing much earlier than 5 years ago. Small amounts had been disappearing for a decade, but they'd made excuses, attributed it to their own forgetfulness. It was only when Cassandra got greedier, taking thousands at a time, that they'd been forced to acknowledge what was happening. They documented everything but never pressed charges because they still loved her, still hoped she might change. The video showed Mom holding up a box of evidence. Every forged check, every fraudulent credit card statement, every fake piece of jewelry, every receipt for things Cassandra had bought with stolen money. They'd kept it all, not for revenge, but for protection. They knew that someday the truth would have to come out, and they wanted me protected when it did. The final part of the video was them speaking directly to me. Dad said I was never a mistake, never unwanted, never second best. Rebecca had been Mom's best friend before becoming her sister-in-law, and they'd loved me even before I was born. When Rebecca died, they didn't see it as taking on a burden, but as receiving a gift, the daughter they'd been praying for. Mom's last words on the video were the ones that broke me completely. She looked at the camera and said that blood might make you related, but choice makes you family. And they'd chosen me every day for 29 years and would choose me again in whatever came after. She said the trust wasn't about money, but about protection, ensuring that their chosen daughter was safe from the one who'd chosen greed over gratitude. When the video ended, the courtroom was silent except for muffled crying. Even Judge Hoffman was wiping her eyes. The only person not crying was Cassandra, though not for lack of trying. The Botox had frozen her face so completely that she couldn't even produce tears properly, making her look even more inhuman in that moment of exposure. Cassandra's lawyers were already packing their briefcases, realizing they'd been brought here under false pretenses. One of them whispered to another that she'd told them I was a drug addict who'd manipulated my parents into changing their will. They wanted nothing more to do with her and were probably already calculating how to get out of the representation without getting sued themselves. But Cassandra wasn't done. She screamed that the video was fake, that I'd coerced our parents, that Thornfield was in on some conspiracy. She claimed the trust documents were forged, that the adoption papers were fabricated, that everyone was lying except her. Her voice got higher and more hysterical with each accusation until she was basically shrieking incoherently. That's when Derek stood up. In front of the entire courtroom, he announced he'd filed for divorce that morning. He said he'd watched her steal from her parents, lie about her sister, and destroy a family out of pure greed. He'd been weak and complicit for too long, but he was done. He actually apologized to me in front of everyone, saying he should have spoken up years ago but had been too cowardly. Judge Hoffman had heard enough. She banged her gavel and declared that the trust was valid and would be executed as written. I would receive everything in the trust, while Cassandra would receive the $50,000 from the will, though she noted that evidence of theft could lead to criminal charges that might affect even that inheritance. As if on cue, Officer Mitchell from the Sheriff's Department entered the courtroom. He announced that based on the evidence provided in the video and documentation, they were opening an investigation into fraud, elder abuse, and theft. Cassandra was being charged, and while she wasn't being arrested that day, she needed to surrender her passport and would be formally arraigned the following week. Cassandra's final moment of humiliation came as she tried to storm out of the courtroom. In her rage and hurry, she tripped over her own fake designer bag, the strap tangling around her heel. She went down hard, and when she hit the floor, her self-tanner left an orange smear on the white courthouse tiles. Someone took a photo that would circulate around Millbrook for months, with various captions about karma and falling from grace. 6 months have passed since that day in the courthouse, and life in Millbrook has found a new rhythm. I'm living in my parents' house, our house now, though it still feels strange to think of it as mine alone. The garden is thriving with the tomatoes Mom would have planted, and I've kept Dad's workshop exactly as he left it, down to the half-finished birdhouse on his workbench. Cassandra was convicted of fraud and elder abuse, though the judge suspended her sentence on condition of 500 hours of community service and full restitution. The $50,000 from the will went straight to legal fees, leaving her with nothing. The Range Rover was repossessed within a week. The country club membership canceled, and all those credit cards she'd maxed out expecting millions were now her problem alone. Megan saw her last week working at a phone case kiosk in the mall, trying to convince customers that bedazzled cases were worth $80. The designer clothes and expensive makeup were gone, replaced by the mall uniform and exhaustion. When our eyes met across the food court, she looked away first. There was no apology in her expression, just the bitter resignation of someone whose schemes had finally caught up with them. Derek sent me a letter last month, a real apology this time. He admitted he'd known about the thefts from the beginning but had been too afraid of being alone to leave her. He was in therapy now, living with his brother, trying to understand how he'd become someone who could watch his wife destroy her family and say nothing. I wrote back that forgiveness was a process, but I was working on it. The cousins who'd lied for Cassandra had come forward with the truth once the video played. Brooke cried when she admitted Cassandra had threatened to call in her debt unless she supported the lies. Tyler confessed that the promise of Dad's car had seemed worth a small lie at the time. They were family, and families forgive. But trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. With part of the inheritance, I established the Robert and Linda Whitehead Memorial Scholarship at the community college. It's specifically for adopted children or those aging out of foster care, because family shouldn't be about blood or biology, but about choosing to show up for each other. The first recipient was a girl named Rebecca, which felt like a sign from somewhere. The hardware store is thriving under Uncle Pete's management. He's brought in his son James to learn the business, keeping it in the family the way Dad would have wanted. I stop by sometimes, and the smell of sawdust and metal still reminds me of Saturday mornings when Dad would let me help sort screws and bolts, never mentioning that I was probably making more work for him. Mr. Thornfield and I have lunch once a month. He tells me stories about my parents when they were young, about how excited they'd been when Rebecca came to live with them, how they'd prepared for my arrival like I was their own pregnancy. He recently told me that the teddy bear in those early photos, the one I thought looked old, had been Rebecca's. She'd insisted I have it, her last gift to the daughter she'd never raise. The truth about why my parents gave Cassandra more when we were growing up finally made sense when Thornfield showed me the full financial records. Every expensive thing Cassandra had received, the private school, the car, the trips, had been paid for with money from her biological family. Maria's parents, feeling guilty about their daughter abandoning Cassandra, had sent money for years. My parents had never touched it, saving it all for Cassandra's expenses. They'd been scrupulously fair, even when it looked unfair. Aunt Dorothy has become my closest confidant. She told me she'd been there when I was born in the middle of that snowstorm with Dad helping deliver me because the roads were impassable. She'd held Rebecca's hand while Rebecca held me for the only time, just long enough to whisper my name and make everyone promise I'd always know I was loved. Dorothy had kept that promise in her heart for 29 years. Last week, I was planting bulbs for spring when I found myself talking to my parents, telling them about the scholarship recipients, about the store, about how their tomatoes had won first place at the county fair. I told them about seeing Cassandra at the mall and feeling not anger, but pity. She'd had everything, parents who loved her, a sister who admired her, a husband who supported her, and she'd thrown it all away for money that was never really hers. The last time I saw her was yesterday at the grocery store. She was buying generic brands and counting change, the woman who'd once spent $40,000 she didn't have on credit cards. Our eyes met over the produce section, and for a moment, I saw something that might have been regret. But then she turned away, and I realized some people never learn that wealth isn't about what's in your bank account, but about who shows up when you need them. Standing in Mom's garden now, watching the sun set over the Connecticut hills, I think about what family really means. It's not DNA or blood tests or birth certificates. It's Dad teaching me to use a level, even though I was too young to really help. It's Mom saving for months to buy me the prom dress I wanted, even though Cassandra's extortion meant money was tight. It's Aunt Dorothy keeping a secret for decades to protect me. It's even Mr. Thornfield, who could have retired years ago but stayed on because he'd promised my parents he'd see their wishes through. Cassandra might have been right about one thing. I was adopted, but she was wrong about everything else. I wasn't a mistake or a charity case or an interloper. I was chosen, deliberately and lovingly chosen, by parents who protected me even from beyond the grave. They'd seen what was coming and built walls of legal documents and trust funds to keep me safe from the sister who'd chosen greed over family. Blood makes you related. That's just biology and chance. But loyalty makes you family, and love makes you chosen. And in the end, being chosen is everything.